Hi, thanks everyone for joining this evening, and welcome to this informal meeting of the members of Scrutiny Committee. I think all of the committee members should be aware that this is not a formal committee meeting, that is being not a formal committee meeting under the provisions of the Local Government Act, but the committee's been assured that any recommendations that we make at this meeting will be treated by Cabinet in the same way as any recommendations that would come from a formal Scrutiny Committee meeting. We will be having some external contributions this evening on the local plan item when we get to it. But before we get to that, first of all, I'll hand over to Alice for apologies.
Thank you, Chair. So we've got apologies from councillors Diggins, Fry, Largo and Mundy.
Great, thank you. Did anyone else know any others, or are we all good? Great. Are there any declarations of interest? No. That sounds good. In that case, we will move on to Chair's announcements, of which there aren't any, except to say that the suggestion for this evening is that we switch the order of the two items that we're discussing, so that first of all we talk about item 5, the SIL charging schedule, and then follow that with item 4, the local plan, and then have item 6, dates of future meetings, at the end, just because we're expecting that the local plan is going to take up the bulk of the meeting, and some of the officers here are only here for the SIL item, so that they don't have to sit through us all talking about the local plan. It seems to make most sense for us to do the SIL item first. So unless anyone's got objections to that, we'll go ahead in that order. Great, perfect. In that case, we will move on to the SIL charging schedule partial review of consultation. Thanks to Councillor Upton, David Butler, Lorraine Freeman and Lan Nguyen for joining us this evening. Louise, would you be happy to introduce the report?
I would, yeah, thank you very much, Lucy. So hopefully uncontroversial, this report is asking for a partial review of the community infrastructure levy charging schedule. I guess you all know what the SIL is. It's this sort of fixed levy payable depending on floor space or area on new developments, and it goes towards providing infrastructure in the city. The evidence gathered for the local plan has suggested that the amount that we've been charging on some of the business and industrial uses could be increased. It hasn't, well, when it was first established, 2013, I think, it was actually set much lower than for residential areas, because that made sense at the time. But now we are asking to put that up from £31.59 per square metre to £150. So that's a huge increase, but it's been through the viability test, and that is deemed to be appropriate. I'm sure Lan can speak to that if you want to hear more about that. So yes, we are ready for any questions on that, I think. And just this is just about it going out to consultation to start with. It's not about implementing it immediately. Thanks.
Thanks, Louise. Did officers have anything that they wanted to add to that?
Thanks, Chair. I was just going to add that timing-wise, it makes sense for us to do this in tandem with the local plan, both in terms of consultation and in terms of the examination, which will come further down the line. Very often you have the same examiner that looks at them together. It just is much more efficient that way. So that's where we're coming now, particularly to go alongside the local plan consultation. Thank you.
Thanks. I can open up to questions if anyone on the committee wants to ask Louise or officers anything about this report. I have a couple of questions if no one else has anything. I was wondering, how do Oxford's rates compare to those of sort of comparable local authorities? Are we above, below, about the same as other local authorities? And then sort of a linked question was that when I was looking through the different rates for things, the one for hotels still seemed very low. It still seemed to be like £31 something. So I just wondered why it was that one had still been kept low when those are sort of commercial entities as well.
So I think for the first question, in comparison to other local authorities, I think it really depends when their evidence was gathered, first of all, in terms of the viability evidence. I think more recent viability studies in the UK have shown that particular development types, for example, office and research and development, have risen, and we wouldn't be the only one to be raising rates in that regard. So it sort of varies across the country because the SIL charging schedules were adopted at different times. And the evidence that is within our viability study is the latest data for the Oxford region. So it looks at developments within the Oxford region to do all this modelling. So it is the latest data for us. And in that regard, it's the most up-to-date data set to inform these decisions for the Oxford area. In regards to the second question, I think we did test the hotel use class as well. But I don't think it was deemed that the values of these developments would be able to absorb any additional SIL charge beyond indexation. So we do raise SIL charges for our entire schedule every single year to account for inflation. And I do believe that hotels were tested, but certainly if we had any representations come up about hotels, we could consider those at consultation.
Thanks, that's really useful. If there aren't other questions from other people, I had one more, which was you're talking about how this is coming out at the same time as the local plan and they'll kind of be examined at the same time. What would happen, for example, if this was if there were delays to one being looked at or something, you know, the local plan was held up? Are they sort of like dependent on being passed at the same time? Would delay to one cause a delay to the other, and did it need to be adopted at the exact same time, or is that just something that they were grouped together to make it easier?
You can definitely adopt them at different times. There's an expediency in having the examination, you know, concurrent or consecutive rather, because you're using the same evidence base. But certainly if there were, for some reason outside of our control, a significant delay with the local plan, we could, and you know, my advice would be, should look at bringing this forward simply because of the, you know, economic the benefit in terms of the SIL receipt to the council to deploy on infrastructure projects. But the timeline we've got for the local plan and examination is a pretty brisk one. So we wouldn't be able to bring it closer to us than where we are now. So.
Yeah, thanks. Do any other members of the committee have any questions on this? Or indeed any recommendations at all? No. I also don't have any recommendations on this. So I think at that point, unless Louise or officers have anything else that they wanted to add, I think we might be able to wrap up that item and move on to the local plan. So thank you very much, Louise and Lan and David, for coming along. I know Louise and I think David are staying for the next item as well. But yeah, thank you for coming to talk to us about that one.
Thank you.
Our next item will be item 5, but item 4 in the agenda pack, the Oxford Local Plan document. We've got a public speaker on this one, and we also have some correspondence that will be read out that was sent to the whole committee. So first of all, we will go to Caddy Beck, who is going to address the meeting. Have we got Caddy here? Yes, I can see that we have. Caddy will have up to 5 minutes to address us and doesn't have any right of reply after speaking. But thank you for joining us, Caddy.
We understand that when you send the local plan to the Secretary of State, they will assess whether it is effective i.e. deliverable over the plan period, and consistent with national policy, i.e. in accordance with policies in the national framework. The 2036 plan policy, SP32, for the development of Bertie Park states that planning permission for housing will only be granted if our recreation ground, including its multi-use games area, is re-provided on the land behind Whiteham Street. You have never suggested complying with this requirement. Your proposals were advertised as a departure from the local plan. It is clear that you do not consider a plan policy SP32 to be deliverable over any plan period. So the 2040 local plan states that Bertie Park should be allocated for residential development or a primary school, but you have scrapped the requirement to re-provide the recreation ground. Although this makes the policy in principle deliverable, it is no longer in accordance with policies 8, 98, 99 and 130 of the National Planning Policy Framework. The only way that the new Bertie Park policy could pass inspection would be if your proposal to appropriate the land on Bertie Park for planning purposes is successful. You also state that appropriation is for the regeneration of the park, but this is just silly. Now, although you have started the process of appropriation, it's difficult to see how you can comply with the conditions set out in Section 122 of the 1972 Local Government Act. As a local authority, you have a duty to act within the law. Any decision to proceed with appropriation will trigger judicial review, which is unlikely to be completed before the 2040 local plan is submitted to the Secretary of State. The continued inclusion of Bertie Park on the local plan is particularly ironic, given that you've said that the new local plan 2040 aims to protect existing leisure community and cultural facilities, whether or not they're in district centres. We are therefore highlighting the need to remove Bertie Park from the list of development sites for the 2040 local plan.
Thank you, Caddy. Yeah, thank you. Really appreciate you taking the time to come and speak to us. I think your sort of Zoom speaking rights will be removed shortly, and just would ask members to bear in mind what Caddy said when they're asking questions and looking at the documents this evening. The next thing that we have is that unfortunately you have to listen to me read out an email which was sent to all members of the committee this morning from CPRE Oxfordshire, so that I don't paraphrase this and end up sort of changing the meaning of what they wanted us to say. It's been advised that I do just read the full email, so I will do that now. Dear Scrutiny Committee members, Oxford is host to a wide range of community, environmental and civic organisations, all of whom are committed to working for a sustainable future for our amazing city. Imagine how strong a local plan could be if it harnessed the passion and expertise of these groups in a coordinated way and genuinely involved them in the development of the local plan. Instead, it seems that we are once again here in a position of tick box consultation with groups that have concerns forced into confrontation and opposition, rather than feeling that their views have been listened to, let alone taken into account. We are also surprised to see that the draft local plan has effectively been published ahead of its consideration by Scrutiny. In that context, we ask members of the Scrutiny Committee to make the following recommendations to Cabinet. 1. The Regulation 18.2 Consultation Response Report is not considered fit for purpose and should be rewritten prior to the local plan consultation. And then bullet points saying, should a total of approximately 100 responses be considered sufficient to establish that consultation has been adequately conducted? Why is there no indication of where the responses have come from? Are these from individuals or groups representing hundreds or thousands of Oxford residents? Why is there no weighting indicated as to the level of agreement on comments? We are simply given an edited list of comments, but no indication of how many people agree to each of these. Most importantly, why is there no indication of how the City Council will respond to these comments? We wonder if the Council can point to one single change to the local plan that has been made in response. As an alternative approach, the committee might like to consider this consultation report produced recently by South and Vale District Councils alongside an interactive issues consultation website. Those are linked in the email. Admittedly, this is at an earlier local plan stage, but it does set out clearly how the councils intend to respond to comments. The second recommendation is that a further paper on the housing and economic needs assessment should be published alongside the local plan consultation, giving specific responses to the detailed criticisms that have been made of this document by a wide range of statutory and non-statutory stakeholders. We agree that Oxford needs considerable investment in genuinely affordable housing. Nonetheless, decisions must be made on good evidence to avoid the unnecessary loss of green space and countryside, including Greenbelt, and the HENA is clearly flawed. Critical questions remain unanswered. For example, why the trajectory proposed for Oxfordshire as a whole envisages the population growing by nearly 27% by 2040, compared to Office for National Statistics estimates of a UK population increase of less than 5%. Why the level of growth proposed is over 50% more than the growth experienced in the previous period. Why household growth is assumed to continue at the same rate from 2019 to 2029 to 2029 to 2039, when the ONS predicts a 41% fall in the second decade. Why net migration is based on a 5-year rather than 10-year average, adding 20% to the figures. Unfortunately, we're not able to attend tonight's meeting in person to read this statement. However, we ask Scrutiny Committee to give careful consideration to these matters, which are crucial to delivering a thriving Oxford in the context of both the city and the county as a whole. Yours faithfully, Helen Marshall, on behalf of CPRE Oxford. So again, if everyone was just able to bear that in mind whilst they are looking at the draft local plan this evening. Moving on, however, to Louise and officers who are here, would you be able to introduce the report and perhaps consider responding to the CPRE email and Caddy's comments when you do so?
Lucy, yes, I hope we will be able to do all those things between us. So the local plan 2040, I don't think I can overemphasize how important a document this is in determining how Oxford, which is the city everyone on this call either lives in or works in or both, how Oxford is going to develop over the next 15 years, how well it's going to be working in 15 years' time. This set of this plan is the documents that we use to determine planning applications, and we'll be using this precise document for the next 5 years at least. These are the policies that decide where houses are going to go, where jobs are going to go, how we're going to protect green and blue spaces, how we're going to ensure music venues are not built in residential areas, how we're going to protect our district centres, for example, to make sure that they stay vibrant and thriving, how we make sure no carbuncles are built next to Radcliffe Camera, etc. It's an immensely complex document, and the officers who are on the call with me tonight, but particularly Sarah and Rachel, I think have slept and drunk this for the last many months and years, so that they know it inside out. It's pretty groundbreaking in some respects. They've had to walk a very fine line between getting the kind of things we all want in terms of social housing, in terms of carbon neutral buildings, in terms of improved biodiversity, and having opportunities for locals for jobs, protecting the heritage buildings, protecting our environment, etc. And I think they've got the line about right, while ensuring that buildings are still viable. But we're looking forward to hearing from you if you think we haven't, and if you've got improvements that we can make. So I would just like to say thank you very much to Caddy for her contribution earlier. I think there's a technical point there she's making, but I don't think it does invalidate us including Bertie Place, but I think maybe David could expand on that. And also for the CPRE comments, first of all, it's great that they are, they're wanting what we want, which is a vibrant, healthy, beautiful city that works for everyone. I think there have been some misunderstandings about some of the consultations and levels of responses and things, which maybe Rachel can address to some extent. Thanks.
Thank you. If I go next then and touch on the procedure, where we are really and what this report is asking. So just to set out briefly the stage we're at with the local plan project, because it is a lengthy project that covers a number of years. So in this committee cycle, we're seeking approval of the draft local plan for publication and thereafter submission to the Secretary of State for examination by the Planning Inspectorate. This is the 4th time during the project that we've published material for consultation. Just to remind you, we consulted on issues and options in 2021 to test the the objectives and the issues that the local plan was going to cover. That was followed up by consultation in the autumn of 22 on preferred options, which tested the different ways in which were available to us to use local plan policies to address those issues. There was a supplementary preferred options consultation in spring 2023, which is the element that CPRE referred to. That was a supplementary consultation on a single issue regarding housing numbers. With the ending of the Oxfordshire Plan programme, we had to supplement the preferred options that we'd already consulted on, as I mentioned, in the autumn of 2022. That's why it was a relatively small number of people responding. It was a sort of single issue consultation that was supplementary to those that had gone before it. Before we submit the local plan for examination, we need to publish the draft plan for a period of at least 6 weeks. Unlike previous consultation stages, this publication is no longer focused on seeking views and alternative options. Rather, it's an opportunity to comment on the content of the draft plan within a specific remit. To be specific, it's whether the plan meets the tests of soundness, because that will be the basis on which the examination is held. If significant issues are raised during this consultation, we'll need to redraft the plan. We'll need to go back through the committee cycle, get approval to publish again. That's how the process would work. If that's not the case, then as I'd explained in this committee cycle, we would look to proceed to submission so that the Planning Inspectorate can set an inspector ready to examine our plan. And all the comments that are received at this stage will go to the inspector for his consideration as part of that examination. I hope that helps in terms of where we are. In summary, this has been a long process to get to here with a range of consultation opportunities. We're now at the stage of a draft set of policies, which we're asking Council to approve, and then we submit for examination. Thanks.
Thanks, Rachel. Sarah, did you want to add anything?
Yes, I can add a bit in relation to Bertie Place and probably the consultation report as well, if that's helpful. So Bertie Place, it's been allocated in several plans and is allocated in the draft Local Plan 2040. The allocation site has changed. Previously, it included a large wild area really to the west, which was included because it was allocated for a primary school, and that would have been the playing field to enable the primary school. With the new plan, we've only allocated the smaller part to the east because it's not allocated also for primary school but for housing. So we have changed slightly what we're requiring, but it's still very clear in the policy that there needs to be adequate re-provision of the current recreational facilities to meet the needs of those who currently use the facilities and the new residents. And it also cross-refers to draft policy G1 in the Local Plan 2040, which really repeats the MPPF requirements about replacing these facilities. So it's not that the policy allows them not to be replaced. We still expect them to be replaced in a way that's as good as or better than the current facilities. But it's less specific about how that's done, partly because the other site to the west is not now included in the allocation. That's not because we don't think that that can still come forward, but it just means that it will be replaced in some way. and it doesn't have to be in that way. So the allocation we think is fine to go ahead, and it doesn't mean that it could go ahead without that replacement. That's not the intention of the policy at all, or what's allowed for in the plan. In terms of the consultation at Regulation 18 Part 2, as Rachel said, that was a much more focused consultation. We did get more than 100 responses, but I realised we weren't very clear about that in the consultation report. There was 100 which came in through the portal, and they're summarised in Appendix 1, but there were a lot more responses as well by email, and I did try and get the number before the meeting, but I didn't manage to find it, but it's about 1,000, I think. But that consultation just supplements the preferred options consultation that had already happened, where we really did try and get a wide range of responses, and that was on preferred options on all of the topics of the plan. And in that consultation report, we did give responses to some of those, saying how we were considering them and our thoughts on those, to make that clear. But there was far fewer things included in the Regulation 18 Part 2 consultation. It was really just about the HENA and explaining the methodology of that, and giving one option, which was a kind of draft policy, which has now gone to be policy H1 of the draft plan, which we did consider the responses carefully. They're about the methodology of the HENA. We did go back to the consultants to check a few things. I think we're still confident that the HENA uses an appropriate methodology to get to the housing number. So the consultation responses didn't change our consideration of that. But we will also put out a background paper, which is really clear on some of the points that have been raised and why we've taken the decisions that we have to continue considering the HENA as the appropriate way to assess our housing need. So that should be clear in the new consultation to support the draft policy H1.
Thanks, Sarah. We can move on to questions. I imagine that there are going to be lots on all sorts of topics. So I thought we would start off by talking about the kind of broad policies, and then talking about site-specific questions in a second section, and that maybe we could try and group around certain topics. So if someone asks a first question about housing numbers, then everyone who's got a question on housing numbers could then go next, just to try and make this slightly easier to manage. Saying which, does anyone have any questions? I'm not seeing anyone's hands, but I don't know. Chris.
All right, for want of anybody to leap into the breach first, I'll have a go. First of all, thank you very much to Sarah and Louise, particularly in that I sent a lot of questions through beforehand, and they very kindly addressed them in writing. So these are really just a couple of follow-ups. I won't, as you request, I won't ask about particular sites right now, but I would like to ask about the general sort of the more abstract question of site allocation, and particularly what we do when somebody had at some point expressed interest and then that interest has sort of dropped away for the time being, which seems to be the case with especially some of the smaller sites that were perhaps up for a site policy and now probably aren't going to receive a site policy. Basically what I'm driving at is they've changed their mind once. It's conceivable they might change their mind again before we define a new local plan. You know, a lot changes in just a few years, especially recently, in terms of the economics of construction and what is and isn't viable to do, and this sort of thing. So I guess it's a little surprising that we would not set a site policy just because their interest, the developer's interest, has waned for the time being. Is there a reason why we want to do that rather than just set the policy anyway, to set out what we would welcome at that site were their interest to return, their circumstances to change during the period of the plan?
Shall I take that one? We have been working really hard to get landowners to tell us what their intentions are. And it's not just that they've kind of said, oh, we're not particularly interested right now. We actually have from them, we will have in all of these cases where we've taken a site out from being allocated, they will have said, we do not intend to bring this site forward in the plan period, or not for something that a use that's worth allocating. They might be intensifying sometimes, but we don't necessarily need an allocation for that, more if they're changing the use. So sometimes they're just not intending to bring it forward for housing, for example, and therefore we haven't allocated it for housing because it would be completely contrary to the landowner intentions. Because when we allocate the sites, the inspector will check that they are all deliverable. And if the landowner is saying that they're not intending to bring it forward, then they won't be deliverable and we can't include them. Yes, they could change their minds again, but obviously we do this process often. So in terms of the HELA, so we will get landowner updates, which could change our housing land supply, for example. Because they're not allocated doesn't mean that they can't come forward. If they do change their minds again, they can still bring the sites forward. The allocation just gives further detail to give more certainty to everybody, including the landowner, about what we expect and to reflect the policies of the plan specifically for that site. But all of the general policies of the plan would still apply in the same way. But we haven't taken them out lightly. It's because we really don't think they'd be deliverable to be kept in the way that they were. And it's quite a strong statement usually from the landowner about their intentions, not just a vague one.
So just to very briefly follow up, if that's okay, Chair. Are you saying that that solely they're not being interested in doing that as of now would be regarded by the planning inspector as a reason not to include a policy about that? Because the really surprising thing is just the fact that, yeah, the current landowner isn't interested, but we're not going to set another local plan for about 4 or 5 years typically. And it's entirely conceivable that stuff will change, and it's in 6 months they've decided to sell up, some new landowner is in place, and that new landowner has a completely different vision, completely different ideas as to what they might do. And it's just a little odd that we then would not have that policy in place to welcome whatever they if they wish to pursue a similar plan to that themselves.
I think that's what the general policies of the plan are for. So, we're positive about things like if people want to bring forward housing, but the site allocations is a different part of the plan. So it doesn't mean that we're not positive about change, and that we obviously have design policies that would guide how that comes forward, and policies which guide which uses are suitable in which locations, and a general strategy. But in terms of a site allocation, yes, that's absolutely the case. You need to know what the landowner intentions are, and to understand that and to reflect that in the policy.
I think Louise wants to come in on this.
Yeah, I think it might clarify. So as the site allocations is all about actually us being able to add up the numbers of houses that we really think we are going to be able to deliver. And we don't want to put something in there that we really can't, because this all feeds into what what is going to be our unmet housing need. So we have to be really realistic. Okay, wonderful if we do get some extra things coming forward that we weren't expecting, but we can't count on those in any way.
Thanks. Do we have any other questions sort of related to this, Sandy, or was yours on a different topic? Completely different. I think Chris Jarvis, did you have your hand up earlier?
Yeah, it's on a related topic, but
if everyone's are, then go ahead, and then we can have Sandy afterwards.
So I had a question around the definitions of district and local centres in the papers. So and how it's determined what constitutes a local centre in particular. Just thinking about sort of my patch and reading the definition of a local centre, which I think is on page 167, and cross-referencing that with a list of local centres, it seems to me that there may be areas of the city which we're not currently defining as local centres for the purpose of the policies, but very much reflect that definition. So in particular, in my area, I'm thinking of Magdalen Road, which is definitely more than a small parade of shops purely of neighbourhood significance. In that, you know, it has a series of licensed premises, it has a supermarket, it has substantial office use. It seems to me that that's the kind of area that very much meets the definition of a local centre. And there may well be other areas in the city that I'm less familiar with that would as well. So I guess the question really is like, how is that list determined relative to the definition?
Should I take that one? I think it's difficult because there's no there will be fine lines, and I think a lot of the local centres have been defined for a long time and carried forward from one plan to the next. And we did look again at whether we could include any more local centres, and we particularly looked at areas which weren't well served by other local centres. So in some areas we did include one new one, I think in Marston, because there was nothing else around, so it was clearly the only thing that was serving that local community, and that was a key consideration. I think the local centres, they are limited in any event in what they can protect, because there's a lot of changes to government policy. So obviously within use class E, that's now very broad and things can change from shops to offices, and also there is the permitted development to change to housing from those uses as well, which limits the protection, but we're trying our hardest to make sure that they do stay as active frontages, which try to attract people from the local area. But I think, yeah, like I say, when it's on its own and there's not other things nearby which are serving the same function, then that is when it stands out as a centre serving that sort of wider area rather than as a local parade of shops. And if there are other centres very nearby, then we didn't add it to that list because they seem to more clearly have a very local function. It's difficult with the NPPF definition, which says you cannot include a local parade of shops as a local centre. So we were quite cautious not to include things which were just a local parade of shops. But as I say, there's not a clear absolute definition. It was just a certain judgment, I suppose.
Chris, did you want to follow up, or was that separate?
Just quickly, really, I guess the proximity issue that you mentioned, I think it does make sense to an extent, but it doesn't make sense, I don't think, in relation to the list of local centres that are on the list, because you've got St Clement's listed as a local centre, which is obviously connects directly to Cowley Road, which is listed as a district centre. You've got the sort of Jericho patch of Orton Street and Little Clarendon Street, which is extremely close to the city centre, and yet you've got other areas which, you know, like for example, is the area that I know best. So Magdalen Road and St Clement's to me don't seem strikingly different in terms of their character and in terms of their proximity to the existing district centre. So yeah, I guess I guess it'd be, I don't know, it's not really a question, it's more of a response to to that, but if you have any reflections on how that's assigned, that'd be really helpful.
Yes, those two you've mentioned obviously are close to other centres, but I think they do quite clearly have a wide draw, and I suppose, but like I say, there's not a strict measurement of that, so it's probably just a judgment, really, isn't it? But you know, there's more sort of bars and clubs and things which are drawing people from further away, for as an example. But yeah, it's not black and white. I do agree.
Louise, I don't know if you wanted to come in on that or if you're happy with the response.
Well, I think Chris raises a really good point. I mean, there are quite a few of these little, yeah, like Magdalen Road is a really good example of somewhere that people really appreciate having a few different things there, a mixture of things that are well loved. But I think it's a judgment call. It's difficult. I think that might be one we would want to look at in the future. But as Sarah points out, it's really difficult to protect something like that, now that we have the changes in the NPPF that mean we can have these changes between use classes without, without them having to get our permission. Yeah, sorry, that's just a reflection, really. Yeah.
Perhaps we could potentially come back to this as a recommendation for that list of district centres, local centre, whatever the wording is, to be reassessed potentially. Sandy, did you have a question as well?
Yeah, I just wondered if I could ask about healthcare infrastructure. I've been in contact with Councillor Upton about this in the past week or so, but looking at the infrastructure delivery plan, it's striking that there's only one healthcare need identified for the whole city. Now, I apologise, I may be missing something that's somewhere else. It's hidden in Appendix 4. The only healthcare infrastructure need that I can see is for a new practice for Summertown. And I just wonder whether the officers could describe a little bit about the process of engagement with NHS stakeholders and understanding what their needs are.
Yeah,
I mean, you could probably read between the lines in my question. I think there are some other unmet needs, and in particular, I'm concerned about my patch and the southeast of the city. Yeah, obviously we rely on what we're told by the primary healthcare providers and I've forgotten their name now. It's just gone from my head. The Bob, it's just gone. Sorry. ICB. ICB, thank you. I always forget since they changed their name. We talk to the ICB and rely on them having a strategy for how they're going to cover the needs. Obviously, we tell them what the plan is and what the growth expected in population and where our main sites are, so that they can respond to that. It is challenging for them and for us, because they need to find a way to deliver these things. So what they've looked at is where there's potential for expansion of existing surgeries. Providing a new surgery can be very difficult because there's not many opportunities within the city for that to happen. And also it relies on GPs to bring it forward. There's more potential in some of our unmet needs sites on the edge of the city, but obviously one with big potential is the Diamond Place site as well in Summertown. But there are some which are expanding, and when there's developments nearby which could be affected, then they will say that there should be Section 106 contributions towards that, for example. And yeah, it's their job. Well, we need to tell them what our plans are, and they need to consider what they need to do to try and meet those needs. And then we reflect that in terms of Section 106 contributions we take, occasionally mentioning it in a site allocation policy like Diamond Place, where that's a possibility. Yeah, so that's how it works.
Rachel, did you want to come into
just one brief point to add to that, if I may? The local plan is encouraging if a healthcare provider wants to come forward with a facility within the city, there is encouragement in the policy of those kind of benefits to the community of those kind of uses. So if plans should become clearer and plans should change, absolutely the local plan would support that. So in lieu of specific requests for specific allocations, we've been a general encouraging approach in the local plan for that.
And Sandy, I'm imagining that might be a follow-up.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think there is an issue here in that GPs make a lot of the decisions here, but they're not property developers. They don't really understand that the opportunities that there might be coming up from sites which might be developed, they probably do not really understand which sites are going to be developed over this sort of time horizon. I think it may be that some more dialogue is helpful, but I'll talk with Councillor Upton about that separately, perhaps.
Thanks. Mike, do you want to ask the question next?
Thanks, and it's I guess tangentially related to Sandy's points, although more broad, and that is, what scope do we have within the local plan for and anticipating pressures that might come from outside the district. The reason Sandy's point got me thinking about this is the situation in Barton, where currently and there's a new development in South Oxfordshire, 1,700 homes proposed in their local plan, but no GP surgery, because Bob ICB have said they don't believe it's necessary on that site. That, of course, will cause a significant amount of pressure on GP surgeries that are within Oxford in the Barton and Headington area. So is there any scope for the local plan to take account of the impact of developments outside the district boundary, or does it have to be, does the law require us to work in silos on that? In other words, pardon my ignorance.
I don't know who's able to respond to that one. Louise or...
Shall I? I'll pick that one up. Only because the answers, I suppose, fairly similar to what Sarah said, but for the district to deal with. So when that allocation is coming forward across the border, they'll obviously be talking through the local plan process with ICB Bob and others. And so really that's the process in terms of dealing with that. We wouldn't be able to predict in advance what another allocation is going to do outside of our boundary. So what we're being told by the healthcare expert in that situation is there's sufficient capacity or change in the healthcare system that's coming forward. And obviously, if we did something different in our area, we'd simply be asking the same people who've already said that it's fine. So whilst we work very closely with our neighbours on a whole range of matters, this is one that is covered, but we are ultimately in ICB Bob's hands in terms of how they foresee GP practices across the piece.
Sandy, is this another one on a similar topic?
Yeah, so similar. I mean, so the land south of Grenoble Road, very similar issue to what Mike's just mentioned around the development near Barton. I've just looked at the South Oxfordshire Infrastructure Delivery Plan, and there's a 2.6 million contribution that's been requested by whichever clinical commissioning group covers that bit of South Oxfordshire. But in reality, the burden's highly likely to fall upon GPs within the city. People from Grenoble Road are probably going to go to the Leeds Health Centre, for example, rather than a rural GP practice in South Oxfordshire, I would think. So I think there is I don't know what the answer is, but there's a real problem with joined up cross-border working.
Yeah, thanks. Louise, do you want to respond?
Just to wholeheartedly agree really with Sandy, with Councillor Douglas, but this is something that the Future Oxford Partnership Planning Advisory Group is grappling with. We've realised that it is a problem that we're not all able to, that we do need to work together with the Bob ICS in order to sort out health provision. But it's a complicated thing for all the reasons that officers have outlined, but it is on our agenda and we are trying to fix it, but we're not going to be able to fix it in this local plan.
Thanks, Louise. Chris, unless you gesticulate and tell me that yours is on the same topic, I might ask my own question next.
It isn't. No, please go first. I put my hand up because it looked like we were approaching a topic boundary.
Great. So I just wanted to ask some questions about the viability policies. I feel like there's lots of, quite ambitious ideas in the local plan, but some of them are to an extent undermined by the viability policy if developers say that it's not viable for them to follow those ambitious ideas. So I wonder if it would be possible to just hear a bit more about how that that viability policy was put together, in particularly that cascade where you draw out the affordable housing, parking provision and net zero buildings policies as ones which could undermine viability. And then that particular order in how you've said the cascade goes, where it is first net zero policies which are don't have to be followed, and then parking, and then affordable housing finally. I think it's interesting those three in particular have been drawn out. In terms of the parking one, I think I probably am not the only councillor who would say that developments with low parking seem to be completely viable and being developed across the country. And in terms of that one on net zero, are we not just passing on costs to the people who buy those houses who then have to retrofit their homes because the developer wasn't made to make them like climate resilient? So it'd be interesting to hear a bit more thinking on that.
Yeah, shall I go now on that one? Okay, the viability cascade, we work with our viability consultant on it, and they gave us advice on which the most expensive policies were. And that's why those three are chosen, particularly for the cascade, because they are the ones that are most likely to have an impact on whether something is viable or not. So other policy approaches are less affected by that. And what we've wanted to do is maximise all of those policies. And really the viability cascade enables us to do that. So with policy R1, which is net zero carbon in operation for all kinds of development, we think that is generally achievable and viable, but there will be times when it's difficult to achieve, and that's when the policy allows for offsetting. But sometimes for some particular types of development, we're expecting that offsetting could be very, very expensive. And that is why the viability cascade allows for that to be reduced in increments. And that's only the offsetting, it's not the policy as a whole. Only if offsetting is allowed, which it generally wouldn't be anyway, only if they've worked through the policy. So it mostly would expect R1 to apply. And this just means that we can really push to the maximum with policy R1, because there is this kind of clause for some particular types of development where we know it will be particularly challenging. And it's similar with the parking policy. Yes, absolutely, low car parking developments can happen. It happened in Oxford, and we don't think this will affect most kinds of development. But we do ask for low car in quite a wide range of areas, and we're expecting this to be more of a problem in some of the suburban areas where houses are coming forward as well as flats, and where there's an expectation of car parking for those houses. And when it isn't there, it will affect the saleability of those properties. And that's what the viability consultant expects, and what other work that has been done expects. And then obviously that increases borrowing costs for the developer and costs overall. So it could in some locations be an expensive policy, and this cascade just allows that to be looked at before the viability impact gets to affordable housing, because it doesn't have to be in there. If it's not in there, then it would go straight to affordable housing. So the cascade is a way of enabling us to really prioritise affordable housing without undermining the intentions of the other two expensive policies. Mostly things will be net zero carbon in operation. And even when the cascade does allow for them to increase the amount of parking, it's only up to what's already the maximum parking standard for the rest of the city. So it's only in the real low car parking areas. And we're expecting in district centres where flats are coming forward, no one would be wanting to put parking anyway. There'd be no expectation of that. So it's not across the board, but it means that we can really expand where that policy is applying to, and apply it to the maximum amount of places that we can. Because when it's really going to disrupt what happens, then there's something that can be done about it before it starts affecting the affordable housing. So that's the intention of it.
I think Louise was going to come in, but maybe Louise could also answer a bit about how does the council interrogate those calculations from developers which say that they can't deliver these things and it's not viable? What's the process for doing that?
I did want to really emphasise that just because it says in that that there is a viability cascade in there doesn't mean that the builder can just turn up and say, oh no, I don't think it's viable, so I'm not going to do X, Y and Z. It is incredibly stringent how they have to prove to us that it is not viable. And I think in the last 5 years we've only had 2 developments in the entire city where a developer is able to prove that. and in that case, with our current policies, it meant they were able to reduce the amount of social housing provided, as that's only twice, and in both those cases it's because they were providing huge amounts of extra infrastructure, like building the primary school in Barton Park, but actually that one has now got up 50%, so it may only be one in the last 5 years. So it's the cascade is in there, but please don't look upon it as weakening those policies, saying about all of those things we want. It is very, very stringent if someone wants to prove to us that it's not viable. But you were asking about the order in which things go. It is to some extent a slightly political choice about which we want to prioritise and protect most of all, and we have gone with social housing. There we are.
Yeah, no, thanks. That's yeah, no, really useful. I was just keen to hear some of the thinking behind it. Chris, I think you had a question.
Thank you. I wanted to ask a bit about the affordable workspace policy. Obviously in the options consultation, we had some sort of quite pointy policies with some quite sort of strict criteria, and we've now got something which is a bit more. It struck the specific numbers for certain. So for, the way it's phrased at the moment, it's phrased quite a bit as though 0 would be acceptable, even on the sites that are enumerated. So we list these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 sites. And say that for those 8 sites, we want to see an affordable workspace strategy, which would set out details of affordable workspace to be delivered as part of their master plans. But because it doesn't give any particular targets as to how much that should be, or what constitutes affordable in this context, and things of that kind, it sort of seems as if it sets no lower bound. So would 0 actually be an acceptable answer in drawing up such a strategy, or a very small amount or a very small discount? But by providing no lower bound at all, aren't we kind of open to almost any answer given in the strategy that they submit?
I don't know who would like to respond to that.
Shall I start on that one then? So yes, affordable workspace. It was a new idea really that we tested in the preferred options. We thought that there was important that as a city we look at strengthening and broadening that employment base, and we thought, well, maybe this is one tool that we could explore using to try and do that. We've done the testing, we've just talked about viability, we've done some viability work on what that would mean. That viability work showed us that in some cases there is viability available for developers to contribute towards affordable workspace, but it is limited at the moment. That's what the evidence shows. So we've named those sites where we believe that should be a part of the ask from the developer on those sites. We've also been encouraging for others to think about it. So we have a policy that sets out a list of things that we would like developers of employment floor space to show us how they've thought about this, how they're going to address these objectives, these policy objectives through their development, and affordable workspace is one of those. I would say it is quite a complex thing because if you just think of the equivalent of affordable housing, there's a whole suite of mechanisms, partners, policies and procedures to implement affordable housing. None of that really exists for affordable employment space at this point. So this is a new area that we're exploring. I think we've got to a point where we're being very positive towards it. We know there are sites that can do it, and we've explored the potential for those in principle with those landowners, and we think that that'll work. This may be an area of work that we want to build on in future local plans, but this is a new area that we're exploring, we're testing. We would love to get this passed through the examination and then build from there, really. Hope that's helpful.
Yeah, and Louise, did you want to add something?
Just to stress again, this is one of these really groundbreaking policies. Nobody else is doing this. I think that's right, isn't it, Rachel? No one else across the country is doing this. This is, we wanted to try and make sure that lots of, we've got a booming economy here in terms of large life science companies wanting to move here, and we wanted to try and make sure that some of that spills out into local economy, local startups having space to do it. But when you actually come to think of the sort of the legal framework to put around it, it's actually really complicated to see how to do it. So, you know, the local plan team there have sweated blood to find a way of doing it that we hope will get past the inspector, because that's not guaranteed. If they don't think that this is a sensible or viable thing to do, this could get thrown out by the inspector.
Thanks. Chris, are you following up or new topic?
Yeah, no, so I completely accept that it's obviously a very difficult thing to deal with, and that a overly prescriptive policy is something that might just not work or just prevent things from happening that would be desirable. But I suppose the thing that continues to trouble me is just the fact that there is no concrete ask, that the only concrete thing that we're asking them for is to write as a document, and that, for example, if they were proposing that in this particular development they couldn't deliver anything at all, there isn't even a requirement to sort of justify that in the following terms, or, you know, or address the following issues in justifying why you don't think that anything can be offered on this site. It seems like something which is going to result in the writing of warm words on the topic, but not any delivery. Whilst retaining that flexibility, is there anything we can do to require them to at least address specific points in justifying why it might not be delivered on a particular site?
Louise or Rachel, I'm not sure who prefer to respond.
Yeah, Rachel, what do you think? I mean, it's.
I'm afraid I just kind of reiterate what I said. I think we've gone as far as we can with this policy at this stage. It is a wholly new thing that we're attempting to do here. As I say, we have talked to those named developer site owners to explore how we could do this, and there has been an appetite for that. I think we can work collaboratively to get these first handful of affordable workspace sites off the ground and build from there. I'm not sure we could add too much to the policy at this stage. Yeah.
David, I saw you had a hand up and then down. I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
I think Rachel covered it, to be honest. The policy is clear. There's an expectation that they need to produce this documentation. I understand the point, but we feel very clearly that we have gone as far as we can on this. I think we want to see and are confident of seeing some delivery on these key sites, and that will very much aid us moving forward and strengthening it. I think we probably recognise and support the sentiment, but don't think we're able to do that right now.
Thanks. And Louise?
Yeah, it's very much, this is an aspiration. And if we can get some delivered now, then in the next round of the local plan, when we've got a good framework, then I think I would hope we can get more concrete proposals in, concrete numbers in.
Thanks. I was going to ask a question now around the first homes policy. So I know that the first homes is excluded from affordable housing provision on the basis that it doesn't really serve the need for affordable housing in Oxford, something which I would agree with. However, I would imagine that the Secretary of State might not agree with that statement. So I was just wondering what consideration has been about how likely this plan is to be accepted when it's excluding first homes, which is a government policy, and what the impact would be, and what changes would be likely to see in the plan elsewhere if the Secretary of State does come back and say that we have to put first homes in as affordable housing.
Yeah, shall I? I'll take that one. Yes, we did think carefully about it, trying to make sure that the plan is safe if we do take this an approach with a certain amount of risk. We did speak to our barrister about the level of risk of trying this approach, and we actually spoke to him a long time ago because we were wondering about trying not to apply it with applications that come forward. And in discussion, it was decided that the best approach was to try and do this through the local plan rather than through planning applications, because we can present evidence at the examination and try and persuade the inspector and then get this policy hopefully through without first homes. We have been encouraged by things that government has been saying in some of its recent outputs on housing, which seems to be really pulling away from first homes. So hopefully that will help. What we're trying to do is produce a background paper explaining why we haven't chosen first homes, because they don't work in Oxford because of our particular circumstances in terms of the viability profile and the expense of housing and not being able to reduce it to an appropriate level, too many one beds coming forward as first homes, which nobody wants, and so on. So we're putting that evidence together. The barrister considers that doing it through the local plan is low risk. And his main advice was that we have an alternative policy sort of in our back pocket, so that if the inspector isn't convinced by our arguments and we have to include first homes, we can present a policy which we'll have to consult on later with first homes included. We don't think it will have any other knock-on effects apart from on policy H2 on affordable homes, and it would just mean changing the tenure split again to include first homes and therefore obviously reduce the amount of social rented, and that's probably the biggest impact that it would have, and that's the main risk, is that we'd have to do that without further risk to the plan.
I'm imagining that would be alternative policy would be providing the minimum amount of first homes that you could get away with including. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Are there any other questions, members of the committee, on broader sort of policies, or if not, maybe we should move on to talking about site allocations? Chris.
Sorry, me again. I only have one more of this kind though, and then I have 2 site questions. So, you know, set an upper bound on how much of me you have to listen to. Parking standards. I gather that in a previous iteration of the plan, there were attempts to look into policy that would wind in existing large pieces of destination parking. So obviously from a Headington perspective, I'm thinking particularly about the hospital sites where there's a lot of destination parking, which is a cause of a lot of existing trouble. You could well imagine that if that amount of destination parking was proposed today, it would be a problem, but obviously it's there now. I gather in the past we've looked at trying to condition new development on winding in some of the existing excessive destination parking, but that hasn't been able to be brought forwards in the past. Is it something that we explored again for 2040? And if so, what were the blockers to doing something of that sort?
I think the blocker is the risk that it would happen as it did last time, where we tried to include those policies in the local plan, but at examination, the inspector drew back from all of them because he didn't think it was justified. So, you know, we've had to consider that there's nothing that's changed that, and we've continued with the same advice, but we are very encouraging on those relevant policies of reducing the level of parking, and we have tried to be clear on that obviously it's always going to be a beneficial thing, and also in terms of not expecting more parking, crucially, and trying to keep the parking allowed as low as possible. But in terms of requiring a reduction in parking, we didn't think we'd be able to justify it through examination, because nothing's changed and we couldn't justify it last time, basically.
Can you elaborate what the inspector's reasoning was? Why they thought that wasn't a justifiable policy?
That's challenging me now to remember. And I think just because, yeah, I don't know. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head exactly how he framed it, but I could find out through the inspector's report. But yeah, I can't.
Thanks, Sarah. Yes, as promised, let's move on to talking about site allocation specific stuff. Chris said he had questions, but does anyone else have questions on this sort of stuff? If not, we can go back to Chris S. But yeah, Sandy, you go first.
Sorry, I wasn't quite ready, so Chris can go first.
Okay, go ahead, Chris Martin.
Okay, great. I'll ask both of mine. So again, thank you for the detailed accounting of the sites that had dropped away in the previous year. Encouraging to see the ratio between taken away because it's happened versus taken away because the interest has drifted off in the meantime. Two particulars that caught my eye there. One is Valencia Road. So there's a few of them where the justification for not setting out a policy is that they're sort of kind of a bit borderline as to whether they would constitute major development. They're sort of hovering around that 10 unit threshold, and therefore we're kind of a bit in two minds as to whether this warrants strategic policy, so site policy, well, as well as occurring within a strategic plan, or whether it's just windfall development. Isn't Valencia Road a bit special on grounds that because it's currently a rec ground, wouldn't that imply that it needed to be an allocated site in order for any development to be considered there? And wouldn't that essentially put us in a place where either it comes forwards because it has a site policy, or it doesn't come forwards at all on grounds that the allocated site condition isn't met? And then the other one is Ruskin Field. Obviously that's of particular ward interest. Can you say what caused that one to drop back away on this occasion? I think just looking at the wording, yeah, so like I appreciate that it hasn't changed, it now hasn't changed since the 2036 plan, but Ruskin Field is a site which has been back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. We've had sort of a couple of the Barton area action plans opined that it wasn't suitable. The Hellars have sort of gone backwards and forwards a bit on that. Some of them saying it's not suitable, some of them saying it is, etc., etc. And now the unallocated bit has gone back out again. Can you say what was the motivating incident to it going back out on this occasion?
Shall I take these? Valencia Road. Well, I'll start with talking about green spaces and whether they can be built on, which will mostly come down to policy G1, where we have actually tried to go further than the MPPF. The MPPF gives guidance on open spaces and says that either someone can say that they're surplus to requirements, in which case they can be developed, or they replace or re-provide. And in policy G1, we have kind of taken a three-tier approach to green spaces. So some green spaces are allocated as part of the core network, and those we're trying to say need to be protected in situ, which does go further than the MPPF. So they are, what we want is to outright protect those where they are. And we've done a lot of background work to try and identify which sites should be in the core network. And we're hoping that we can justify that policy because it gives really strong protection for those top tier of green spaces. The next tier down are supporting network, which are still considered important green spaces, but that kind of follows the MPPF approach, where we would expect, if development comes forward, for them to be re-provided. With those core ones in the supporting network, we still think that, and we've said explicitly in the supporting text, we don't think that they're surplus, so we would expect re-provision. And it is possible that Valencia Road could come forward without an allocation because it's part of the supporting network, it's not part of the core network, as long as it could be shown that there could be re-provision. But we haven't allocated it because we did further design work, and we think that keeping green space there with the playground, intensifying the use on what remains, and coming forward with the development does not enable 10 units to come forward. So we haven't allocated it, and we don't think it's necessary to allocate it. It doesn't necessarily preclude it coming forward. But yeah, that was the reason. We don't think it will come forward with 10 units. It's not the capacity of the site. Ruskin Field, not sure how to answer that, because the allocation proposed in this plan is exactly the same as the allocation proposed in the local plan 2036.
I'm referring to the proposed allocation, well, the draft that appeared in the options document that suggested the allocation of the remainder of that site as well. So that drew the box all the way out to the ring road. Whereas between September 22, when that was proposed, and now, when this is proposed, the box has shrunk back down to its size as it appeared in Local Plan 2036. So all I'm asking after is, what was the motivating incident to that being revised back down once again?
Right, sorry, yes, I should have got that. The reason it was larger when we consulted at the earlier stage was because that's what the landowner put forward again. So the landowner did come forward again and put forward the whole site for development. So we needed to consider again the whole site for development. And in the early stages, we're kind of letting people know which sites we're considering before we do the allocations. And as we looked at it, we didn't think there was any justification. And in fact, the wider field, I think is part of the supporting network. Actually, I can't remember, but we haven't allocated it. We still don't think that it should have an allocation for the reasons that we didn't allocate it last time. But that's why it was there earlier. It's because it came forward again and was put forward again as a site we needed to consider.
Thanks. So I know Sandy had a question, but I think Chris Jarvis has to leave at about 12:30. So maybe if you were able to come with your question, and then we can go back to Sandy.
Thank you. Just a quick one on density on some of these site allocations. So the two that I'm looking at in particular are Crescent Hall and the Cowley Marsh Depot. Just reading through the material on Crescent Hall, it struck me as slightly odd that it's described as currently having upwards of 300 bed spaces, and then in the policy it says that the minimum number of dwellings needed to be delivered would be 29, which seems like quite a substantial reduction in density on that site. And then the related kind of density question on the Cowley Marsh Depot is the phrasing that's in there is around similar density to the surrounding residential area for any applications on that. For me, looking at that site, it looks like a prime candidate for a much denser development, and that particular patch of Marsh Road is not particularly densely developed. So I guess, yeah, just a question as to firstly, yeah, on the Crescent Hall one, why that number of 29 is there, and how that relates to the density of the site, and secondly, why only a similar density to the surrounding area be considered with Cowley Marsh Depot.
Yes, I think with sorry, I was just looking at the Cowley Marsh Depot allocation, but I'll start, which was the other site you just mentioned, sorry. Oh, Crescent Road. Crescent Road, it's a net gain. So it's a net gain of 25 units, which we then apply the ratio of 2.5 to if it comes forward as student rooms. So it's, considering it's already fairly well-developed site, that's what we're expecting to come forward as a net gain. And obviously it could come forward with more, and we're very clear about that in the local plan. We've given minimum numbers, and they are a minimum, and more than that would always be encouraged, but that's what we're assuming. And having looked at it and talked to Brooks, we think that's what's capable of coming forward on the site, because they'd have to re-provide all the existing rooms as well as those extra. Then on Cowley Marsh Depot, we've assumed, I can't remember if it's a density of 50 or 60 dwellings per hectare, but it's not a low density that we've assumed. It's, it's a reasonably high density for a suburban area, which we thought was appropriate for that site. but given it's next to the park and so on, it seemed a reasonable density, which it's not wasting the space. And again, coming forward with more, assuming it's suitable in terms of design, is always going to be encouraged. But that's just what we thought was a reasonable assumption of capacity.
Just to clarify on what you were saying about the Crescent Hall one, are you saying that the number there isn't that you've got to provide 30 like dwellings in total, but you've got to provide 30 on top of what the number that's already there?
Yes, that's right.
Sandy, did you want to come in with your question now?
Yeah, two specific site allocation questions from me. So one of them is around Templars Square, and I think this is a really massively important potential regeneration project for the whole southeast of the city. I'm not sure there are any other likely possibilities of a whole district centre, because it is effectively the whole district centre as it is used by local people. I don't think there's any other possibilities of another whole district centre in the city being redeveloped anytime soon. Reading through the sort of red box bit, there's some sort of encouraging wording, but there's also quite a lot of cautious wording about impact on views from St Mary's Tower, which I absolutely acknowledge is important, but I'm pretty sure the view from St Mary's Tower is not the major concern of many people living very near the area who are living in one of the most deprived parts of the city. There's encouraging wording in the green bit about 350 houses and community benefits and so on, but I just wonder if there's anything we can do to be a bit more encouraging on, this is a very well connected site transport wise. I don't know whether 350 dwellings is at the upper limit of what could realistically be achieved there. And I wonder if there's anything we can say about a health facility there, because I think the ICB might welcome that.
Again, it could come forward with more. That's our minimum number, and it is a site which already has a significant amount of housing on. So we can't forget that this is all additional housing to what's already there. So I think for the size of the site, we have pushed it because we want to be ambitious in terms of it delivering new homes. And it could potentially come forward with more, but we have to be careful with the minimum because it is a minimum and they have to achieve that. So I think, it's the minimum where we feel comfortable that we haven't pushed it too far. And given that all of the design will need to be tested, and we have to explain what the impacts could be, so things that need to be considered in terms of the design. So it's not saying anything like you can't do this, but it's saying, when you're looking at it, you need to think about these impacts. And that's not only on views from St Mary's, but it's on the surrounding area as well, including the conservation area and listed buildings which are adjoining it, and also the very low dwellings which are adjoining it and which it will impact. So all of those things do need to be considered, and I think are worth pointing out in the policy, whilst also being ambitious for what can be delivered on that site, and noting in it, as you say, that it is well connected and does have a lot of potential to bring lots of benefits. And it's very open to community uses, and the landowner will be, so they just need to keep up those discussions. I don't think the policy can have a requirement in terms of a health centre, but I think it's very open to it. So that's the kind of thing that will need to be discussed between the landowner, the ICB and so on, but it's definitely allowed for in the policy and would be positive.
Thanks, Sarah. I might ask a couple of my questions now, but obviously if other people have ones, please do put hands up. One was about the northern edge of Oxford allocation. There's a bit right near the end in one of the many appendices where there's kind of like RAG ratings against different site allocations on how they meet the like objectives of the local plan, and I forgot to write down the page number that that's on. But basically, they're all a combination of, you know, greens and oranges, apart from the northern edge of Oxford one, in which there is a lot of red against a lot of the objectives. So it would be interesting to hear why that allocation is as it is, given that it doesn't seem to be meeting the objectives of the local plan. I can try and dig out the page number if it's useful. The other question was just around, we've had one controversial proposed housing development mentioned, so I'll mention one of the others, which is Iffley Fields site. There's obviously some really strong nature policies in the local plan, but that site is still designated for development. And I just wondered, you know, what is the thinking behind it being actually deliverable to develop that site whilst meeting all of those requirements for nature not to be left in a worse state and for net gain to be delivered, especially given that there's also other housing developments which are going to be happening very near to it, like the one on the former St Augustine playing field. But yeah, if you'd like me to try and find that RAG rating thing, I can, but those are two questions. Sorry, I don't know who would prefer to answer that. And would you want me to dig out the page number? Sorry, I think it's really near the end.
Is it Appendix 2, the sustainability appraisal?
Yeah, let me have a look. Yeah, page 446. It's, yeah, section
very impressed you made it into this appendix. I did not make it this far.
I had a fun weekend. Section 6, assessing the local plan policies and sites. There's then a table that starts on page 444, and the bit which mentions northern edge of Oxford is on page 446 and has 4 of the objectives, which are labelled as red. I thought this was the nicer question compared to the Iffley Fields one, but maybe that one's the preferable question.
I think it is tricky with the essay because it doesn't tell you what to do and what not to do. It's just it just appraises things, and then decisions have to be made. And there are obviously things that come out as red for lots of policies or sites, and that just needs to be balanced. So and sometimes it's about mitigations. So it might be that it could have this impact, but you would write something in the policy. But I haven't brought it up yet, so I can't say what the specifics are, but that's just a general sense kind of answer.
And I think one of the red ones is conservation area, which is, you know, it isn't a barrier to growth. It isn't a reason why you shouldn't be allocating something. It's more of a consideration and to a point a constraint, but not necessarily. So I think it's reading it in the round rather. You know, we don't go 5 reds and we won't allocate it. It really does depend on the nature of the site and how far we can take it.
If it's useful, I think the ones that are rated red are carbon emissions, services and facilities, traffic/air pollution, and biodiversity. But yeah, if, also do move on to the second question if there's not a specific response on that one.
So I think the Iffley site, obviously there will be challenges in terms of biodiversity, but the information that we have so far is that we think the site is developable. There's things that can be done to mitigate any loss of biodiversity and to achieve the net gain, which would be off-site enhancements. So the policy can be allocated. We know that the policies are the other policies of the plan, and the site allocation will make sure that they do achieve the net gain. But at the moment, we don't think there's a showstopper. We think there's ways that any issues can be overcome, so the policy can go ahead. obviously knowing that other policies will make sure that it's looked at properly and fully. And I don't think it's affected by, say, the St Augustine's Fields or other ones in the area. I don't think that necessarily affects whether this one can mitigate the impacts.
Would you imagine that on that Ifley Fields site, that the biodiversity net gain would be delivered on site? Because that feels like that might be challenging to deliver it on site whilst developing it. So then I guess that, yeah, that is obviously not the desirable option, not delivering it on site.
Well, I think that's just the case with a lot of our sites. It's very difficult to deliver on site, which is acknowledged in the biodiversity net gain policy. So it's what we'd want people to look at first, but then there's ways to do it off site, and especially with this site being close to a sort of nature corridor, there's enhancements that can happen nearby to the site. So yeah, that's not specific to that site. It's a very common problem in Oxford with achieving the net gain. It's difficult to do on site because the sites are very, very small on the whole, and there just isn't that capacity.
Thanks, that's useful to hear. Sandy, do you want to come in with a question?
Yeah, I just wonder if I could ask about the Kassam site. Things do seem to be progressing, obviously, on the stadium relocation, and at the moment that is very residential led, and I think, Sarah, we've spoken a little bit before about the ozone and commercial redevelopment there. The western edge of that site against Priory Road is an area that will get a lot of footfall if land south of Grenoble Road is developed, and if the Cali Branch Line station goes ahead. There'll be footfall from South Grenoble Road, from Science Park, from new development around Kassam, and people approaching from the east. Is there anything we can do to be more encouraging of some provision of, shops, community amenities, and something other than commercial use along the western edge where the ozone currently is?
I think it's tricky to put in a requirement for a shop, for example, because it will very much be market led, and it's not something that we could justify requiring, I think, for this site, because it wouldn't be necessary to serve it. I mean, there is lots in use class E in the ozone centre, which we expect the ozone centre itself to stay as use class E, which could include shops. So it's not precluded by the allocation.
I guess I'm sort of driving at how we can see the needs of a new development in the round together with the unmet needs of the existing local community.
Yeah, I think there's, yeah, I think we've got stuff about keeping the footpaths, cycle paths and so on to the bus stops and nearby amenities. And I think that's going to be key to making sure there's good accessibility to those for people living there. But it won't be a large enough amount of houses to justify needing a local shop or supporting a local shop, I don't think. But there are amenities nearby which will need to have that foot and cycle accessibility considered.
It links back to the thing earlier about, not really being able to deal with cross-border things in a joined up way, because if we were considering, what will be happening south of Grenoble Road, I think what would be helpful on that site would be we might take a slightly broader view of it than just saying it will let people walk and cycle to the station, which is more or less what we have at the moment.
I just wondered, are there any processes? I know obviously like the Oxfordshire 2050 stuff's not going ahead, but through the Future Oxfordshire Partnership, is there any way through that, for example, to think about some of the cross-border stuff and to kind of think whilst looking at our specific plan, to be thinking more holistically about how people's plans work together across Oxfordshire.
I think that is the intention. As Councillor Upton mentioned earlier, there is an aspiration in the FOP planning advisory group to try and be a bit more coordinated about things. I would just say that, you know, we will have the ability to feed into plans as they come forward on the Grenoble Road site. So, you know, there will be an opportunity for people living within the city boundaries at the moment to be able to go in and access new facilities that'll be within that site. So that's another way of looking at it, and we will be really making sure that good connections are made from the new development to existing areas, so they could be used in reverse too. So that's an important thing to factor in. Coordination between neighbours is a requirement of the plan making process. So we need to demonstrate that we've been working collectively and collaboratively. We won't always agree on lots of things, but there are areas in which that we can kind of push towards where we've got joint objectives, the health one being a good example, really, by approaching the ICB as a collective of Oxfordshire authorities. Maybe we can make more progress on that. But yes, there are a number of mechanisms we can use and try and make sure that we make best use of all of those, really, to achieve the outcomes that we want for our residents.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. I don't know if anyone's got other questions. I think at this point, questions on anything you like in the local plan. If not, I guess we can move towards recommendations. I feel like there's been a few things we've discussed, but if there are other questions, please go ahead. Nope. Okay. Yeah, I think that is everything. So sorry, I'm just remembering what order we are in at this point. Yeah, so I don't know, Alice, I've got a bit of a list of potential recommendations, but you might have also been keeping track of some. I did have one that was me being incredibly pedantic, but I think some of the ward names for site allocations are not up to date, because one of them is referred to as Iffley Fields when it's now in Rose Hill and Iffley instead. So maybe that's a very pedantic recommendation to put in, that they be checked. Alice, I don't know if it's useful to go through your list before we all dive in with them.
Yeah, so I think the main one I've got, sorry, I'm just scrolling up through the discussion, was the potential one from Councillor Jarvis about the definitions of the local district centres and whether that could be reassessed. I'll have another flick through, but that's one that I've definitely flagged.
Yeah. So we'd maybe deal with that one. I guess that would be something around like reassessing, yeah, what that definition is and whether there's other things that should be included on that list. Would there be broad agreement from committee? I'm just looking at Chris's message.
It's unrelated, just writing up a separate recommendation, so I had some text to refer to.
Okay, so on this one around district centres, would we all be happy to include a recommendation on reassessing that definition and perhaps a list, reassessing that list of those?
Is it worth addressing? It sounds like perhaps a large enough change that it would be one addressed to it. Are you thinking something that would be addressed to this generation of the local plan, or something that would be addressed to sort of ongoing work leading towards the next generation of the local plan, or maybe both?
I mean, aim for this one, and if not, maybe it'll be in the next one. Yeah, I was thinking addressing it at this point to this one, even if it's maybe if the list can't be changed and the definition needs to be like tightened or like made clearer about why some things are on it and when some things aren't. Just going back to my list of slightly like not pedantic but sort of logistical ones, I wonder if for when the public are looking at this, it would be useful to have a list of the changes between the previous local plan and this one, because most people are not going to remember everything that was in the last one. And I think it's quite difficult to read this and know what it is that's changed. I mean, I'm sure councillors as well would also appreciate that, but I imagine for the public in particular, it would make it engagement a lot easier.
I have a Google Doc that I constructed in exactly this way at the Reg 18 stage by holding them up side by side and trying to sort of diff the policies. And yes, it took about 4 days to construct. So not having to do that would be very much appreciated.
Yeah. Would there be agreement from committee about a recommendation that at the point where this goes out to the public, it would be incredibly useful to have something making clear the differences between these plans? Yeah, great. Chris, you put one in the chat, which is a proposed recommendation to give affordable workspaces.
The top one is flavor text, if you like.
Okay.
I'm proposing to try to give affordable workspaces back just a single tooth, or in the alternative to get a formal written declination as to why not, which I think is also valuable to have that sort of set down as to why we might choose not to do that, as opposed to it just being expounded in a meeting as today. So I'd like to hear improvements on this, but my proposal would be to recommend that in event a development on one of the 8 named sites, so we already have the 8 named sites which are expected to submit a strategy, that in the event that the submitted strategy does not propose affordable workspace, then it must include a justification as to why it is not appropriate on that site. About something of that form. It still sort of leaves the door open for it not being doable on a particular site, but it just tries to apply a little bit more lean in the direction of it is a desirable thing, and that not doing it in these sites where we have particularly identified that it is appropriate, then that ought to be specifically justified.
Yeah, that sounds like a sensible one to me. Is there agreement from committee that that's another recommendation to be happy to have? I'm just not seeing anyone objecting, so I'm going to say that's a yes. I wondered if Sandy, I don't know if you wanted it. We obviously talked a lot about healthcare. Oh yeah, you've just posted something here. So do you want to suggest what the recommendation might be?
I think I'd probably like to ask for some thoughts from somebody who's got more experience of formulating recommendations and of planning than me. I think it certainly seems as though some more engagement with the ICB could be helpful. I don't know quite how that could influence what's in the local plan.
Perhaps it's something around asking Cabinet to consider further engagement with the ICB about healthcare infrastructure needs. I don't know if that encompasses what you wanted and sounds acceptable, Alice, as a recommendation.
I think so, and there's a sort of second sentence to what I put in the chat. There's perhaps 2 dimensions that are not really, which are both difficult to deal with, but one is existing unmet needs within the city, and the other is new demand likely to be created by new development just outside the city boundary.
Yeah, Alice, do you think that would be we can work that into a recommendation? Is that a bit broad, or do you?
I think I can take that away and have a look at it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just trying to capture it from the chat.
No, thanks. Sorry, I just wanted to check that it was that we thought that would work. Yeah, if Alice takes that away and works a sort of formal wording of it, would we all be happy to accept that one as well? Again, yeah, seeing some nods. Sounds good. I'm just looking back. I wonder if there was something around, we obviously, when we were talking about Crescent Hall, there was a kind of slight confusion about some of the way that the housing numbers were presented, of how many things needed to be delivered. And I did go back and look at that. And to me, that wasn't clear that it was additional 30-something being provided rather than 300 beds being replaced with 30 dwellings. So I wonder if there's something about some slightly more clarity on those sites where it's not just that there's nothing there and 30 will be delivered, but it's that 300 exist and you're going to deliver another 30. Whether that could be made slightly clearer. So something like, I don't know, asking Cabinet to make wording clearer on on site allocations where housing will be delivered in addition to existing housing, something like that. Would there be agreement that would be a useful recommendation? Yeah. Have we got any? I'm just going to go back to my list, but have we got other suggestions from anyone else? I think that is most of the stuff that I've got jotted down. So if there's nothing from anyone else, I think that's is that 4 recommendations, Alice?
I've got 6.
Oh,
so
6.
I've got so at the minute I've got just checking the ward names to make sure they're all correct and reflect the current ones, reassessing the local district centre definitions, and seeing if any more can be added. Then we've got it would be useful to have the list of changes between this and previous versions for public consumption. Then we've got the one from Councillor Smoten about the affordable workspace and the strategies and the justification as to why those couldn't be delivered. Then we've got one about encouraging more engagement with the ICB about the healthcare needs, both existing unmet and new demand. And then the one about the way the housing numbers are presented in terms of where they're in addition to what's already there. So that's 6, if I've counted correctly.
Great. Is everyone happy with that list? Great. In that case, I'm going to say that I think we are done with this item. Thank you so much to oh, Sandy, sorry.
Just wondered if there's anything we can say about upping the importance of the Templar Square redevelopment, because I think it really has the potential to provide a wide range of forms of infrastructure, including changing how that functions as a transport hub for public transport for the area. Again, I defer to someone who has more experience than me of formulating this sort of recommendation.
Yeah, I wonder, I'm trying to think how we could word it. Would it be something about how the wording of that site allocation is, and you just like some wording in there which sort of made clear the importance of the site, or the importance of how it's potentially developed?
I think about recognizing its importance to a large number of residents over quite a wide area of the city. This is wholesale redevelopment of a whole district centre. It's massively important. It's not just about what's provided in terms of housing within it, or
yeah, maybe then it could be something around asking Cabinet to tweak the wording so that it recognises Templar Square's importance to both Cowley but also a wider community.
I think it's perhaps also something about potential. This is an area that has been a thriving centre in the past, but has not been in great health recently. And I think we as the council have quite an important role to play in trying to bring it back to deliver, particularly within sort of livable neighbourhoods or 20-minute city agenda. It's a really important scheme.
Yeah, so I guess for the policy to be amended to recognise the site's importance to the immediate community, wider community, and then that potential of that site to deliver quite a lot more than what it currently does. Alice, is that enough for you to work something up?
Yeah.
Amazing, great. Before I try and wrap us up, has anyone else got anything further, or are we all good? I think we're all okay. In which case, thank you very much, Louise and Rachel, and Sarah and David for joining us and answering all our questions this evening. Hopefully this has been really useful for everyone. And yeah, we obviously look forward to seeing what we hear back from Cabinet from our recommendations as well. We do have one final item, which is just to talk about dates of future meetings. Obviously, Louise and officers probably no longer needed for this bit, but thank you for joining us.
Thank you, all four of you.
Night.
Yes, so you should have on the agenda the dates of future meetings, and just a reminder for everyone that those will all be in person in the town hall as normal, and this was only online because of exceptional circumstances. So yeah, just for everyone to note those, and if we're all happy that those are noted, we can all enjoy our Monday evenings.